And there we go. Welcome to the Cave Podcast, guys. We are back and we're joined with Dacey. Dacey is a spiritual coach and a trauma healer. I'm going to pass it on to her to give the introduction. Dacey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I was just mentioning before the show to Danny how I've been so excited. I love podcasting. I love collaborating with people and just like really pulling information out of each other. It's like one of the best ways of pulling out wisdom that's within us. But we met on Instagram, and my Instagram is Feel the Heal with Dacey. It is my business account. It is where I connect with people who may resonate with my message, my experience. I do love blending psychotherapy, the wisdom of the body, the neurobiology of the body, and the language we have today that correlates with all of that. I love blending that with ancient spiritual wisdom and teachings, and I really integrate all of that in my work with people and what I do. So I do work one-on-one with people. I love to podcast. I love, self-expressing through social media. I think that's like such an amazing platform that we have to be storytellers and creatives. And I also work in treatment centers. So.
That's awesome. How did you get into that? I feel like that's such a advanced and woke way. Yeah, it's such a woke path. You don't just wake up. Well, sometimes you just wake up and have an urge to want to go down that path. But what's the origin of that?
Yeah, it's many stories of death and rebirth, really, for me. Mm-hmm. And I think my soul knew what its curriculum would be on this earth. And so I've chosen many paths of that. And I've chosen to be a portal and a vessel and a teacher and someone that's committed to that. But it did take some radical, divine intervention at different points in my life. And I think I would say the first pivotal moment was when I decided to get sober. And I had been struggling with addiction, and I was in active addiction for many years. It is my belief, I'm super passionate about it, that behind every addict is a history of trauma. It's getting more and more available to us, but there just was not a lot of language around true understanding of what trauma is. And so I got sober. I was lucky enough to have family members in my life who had walked that path before me. And sobriety and recovery from addiction is a lifelong commitment to spiritual growth and to spiritual connection and to living in radical honesty. And it's not just about telling the truth. It's about embodying your spiritual truths and being willing to walk into new truths. And so by that very nature, it comes with a lot of cycles, like the cycles of nature of death and rebirth. And so that happened about almost 8 years ago. So in March, I'll be celebrating 8 years of sobriety. That was my first experience of really committing to this path. And I see it a lot in recovery. People in recovery, there's about a 5-year mark where all of their traumas start to show up. All of the traumas that preceded their addiction, some of the traumas that happened from living in addiction. And a lot of times the foundation of their recovery lacks because they're up against something, they're powerless over the trauma. And that's where my love and my integration of spirituality and then psychotherapy techniques started to blend for me as I reached that point where a lot of trauma started to show up. And that's when I started to getting into the other modalities. And organically after that, spirit was like, all right, now it's your turn to share this with others. And that's how I got, organically one treatment center after another. After I moved to Nashville, like I just slowly started picking up new groups to facilitate.
8 years. Wow.
And when you talk about death, and actually that's a great thing to celebrate. And going that long, like kudos to you, definitely.
For sure.
When you talk about death and rebirth, are you talking about like your previous, like what you're talking, your addiction? So that was the death of the addiction and the rebirth of a new being in a way. Is that what you're trying to explain there?
Yeah, I think, if you think about identity too, and the ego, like our identity, the way we start to newly identify as things can be really empowering and it can actually be serving of spirit, because as we take on new identities, it can be a very expansive experience that opens us up and allows us to move forward and embody a new level of truth for ourselves. But the problem with that is a lot of times we don't acknowledge when that identity is no longer serving us. We get too attached to it and it starts to constrict us. And that's what I mean by death and rebirth. I actually, on my podcast, I have an episode called Identity Detox, because it's the idea of, we don't know what we don't know about ourselves. There's so many truths we all have yet to discover, and new ways of identifying yet to experience. And so when you kind of lean into that, the understanding of that, then you lean into the realization that you're going to go through periods of life where you won't even know it. Sometimes you won't even know when you're being constricted and really limited, and your world has closed in because you're so identified with something. It could be anything, and it could be things that are seemingly positive. Like when I got sober, I started to identify as this sober woman who was of service to many women, who is loyal and in integrity and all these things. But it's like, where am I identifying so much with being loyal that I don't realize where I'm being disloyal, type of thing. There's always a shadow side to things. And so that's kind of what I mean, is like, we don't realize when we've identified too much that we've become so embodied in something and we're not releasing it when it's time. And so I try to lean into that cycle of releasing when it's time.
And can it be that we just become so comfortable and so used to that way of living, or that, that we just, like you said, we don't acknowledge that we're stuck there, and we need to grow.
I was going to ask too, it seems like the addiction parasite is attaching to another form of addiction.
It's a form of attachment, for sure.
Yeah, like it's attaching to the addiction of being that mentor to people, becoming that positive source.
Yeah. And, I think too, this is why I love doing the work that I do with trauma and somatics specifically. So somatics is where where you really incorporate the multidimensional nature of experiencing as a human being, which involves all of the sensory data that we intake and trying to attune to it. And I love doing that because it can help us understand and actually get a felt sense of when we're not being in alignment with our truths. And like for me, one of the most recent examples of this in my life was I was in a 7-year relationship. I moved to Nashville with that person, and I was so identified in the relationship as being a loyal partner. I will support this person at all costs. To the point where I didn't realize where I was actually enabling toxic patterns. And I wasn't surrendering and releasing when it was time. And it wasn't even until my mom had mentioned something and she was like, I think you need to separate. And I would have never in a million years thought that that would be something I would do, because I just never, we were engaged and everything. But when she said it, a whole full body wave came over me of surrender. And it wasn't a truth that I wanted, but it was a truth. And so through that separation, I had to go through a death. And this last year has been one of the most incredible years of my life. I have achieved so many things. I have literally seen my visions realized. But with each one of those things, there was a part of me that was dying. And it's that saying of, if you want a new life, you have to be willing to lose the life that you're in now in order to experience that new life. And like one of the things that felt impossible to me was traveling to Turkey. I'd always wanted to go to Turkey my whole life. And it just was one of those things that I always thought one day. I never thought I would actually get there. And I set that intention. I did a lot of work with all the modalities I use to overcome those traumas and those limitations within me energetically, to become the person that believes I could experience that. And I remember on my way to the airport on the car ride, I was sobbing because I could feel another part of me dying. I felt like every step forward I took, there was a severance between me and this life that I thought I was going to have with that person, grieving a lot of things, grieving a lot of the things I was once attached to having and highly identified with. So that's kind of was my most recent experience with that.
You said, how long has that been? It's been about, you said 7 years ago? We
were together for 7 years and we separated last October. And we have a son together. So we're very interconnected. We're devoted to each other in partnership and friendship. But it hasn't been easy. And there was a divine reason that we were together, and also why we're separated now, because there's a rebirth that's happening in me that's necessary, and one in him that could not happen together. And what came with that for me, a lot of that was I've been healing a lot of societal conditioning, a lot of like patriarchal conditioning, systemic conditioning that I didn't even realize had influenced my relationship, what I was attracted to, the dynamic that existed in my relationship. I didn't even know that it was there until this year of all that healing. And now I can see like, oh, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know, and there was a lot of unhealthy dynamics of that relationship that I wasn't even aware of. And a lot of, it's another form of trauma. There's no trauma that exists that doesn't have some systemic influence in it. So some system of oppression, some history to it from my experience of working with trauma. And so if you think about relationship dynamics, you're bringing a lot more than just two people into a relationship, especially if you haven't done a lot of healing work on yourself or trauma work on yourself, and how different systems have influenced your identity, really.
That's interesting. And these modalities, did you learn these modalities and these methods? Did you already have these methods and modalities in your toolbox, or are these practices that you picked up later down the road?
Yeah, it's been kind of an unfolding experience. At one point, I was working a 9-to-5 job at a dermatology office, and I felt called to do a Reiki training. So that's kind of where it started many years ago, probably like 6 years ago or something. I did a Reiki training. And I was always interested, but this goes back to systemic conditioning. I thought that if I were to pursue anything, it had to have an objective, an end result, it had to have monetary value. And so, that's another way we get identified of like, oh, if I do a Reiki training, I have to be a Reiki healer and I have to see success, the Western idea of success from that. But I realized I was just answering the call of these interests. And over time, I would just do these things. And they weren't just healing for me, but they all ended up becoming my portfolio of modalities that I integrate with my own intuition. So it started with Reiki. When my son was born, I went through an extreme experience of post-traumatic stress disorder. It just unlocked. It wasn't just the surgery. I had a C-section. It wasn't just the surgery that created a traumatic response from my body, but it really unlocked a lot of trauma from my addiction. And so it was a scary experience for me. I thought I was going to relapse. I thought I was going to use again because it was that powerful over me, and all of the resources for recovery and sobriety I had weren't working. That's where I started to go more into psychotherapy, but that's when I did my yoga teacher training. It got me really into my body. I started seeing a therapist who did what's called rebirthing breath work, trauma release breath work. So I first was the client in all of that. And then I started teaching trauma-informed yoga after being certified in that. And then organically, I did a lot of different subconscious mind certifications. So a lot of life coach certifications, hypnosis, neurolinguistics, stuff that like Tony Robbins uses. If anyone
right.
It's that kind of realm of stuff. But for me, it was like a unique experience to blend the deep somatic work of tuning into the body. And I became a trauma junkie, honestly. Like I'm obsessed with studying trauma, studying the language of trauma, studying the language of neurobiology. And then I just organically started getting offers to work in treatment centers and work with clients there. So.
Very good. And I mean, you're explaining all these ways of, there's a traumatic healing and such, which is, I know there's these methods of healing are completely different to, you mentioned Western, the Western society, Western civilization, which we are used to, medication, popping pills, or even, other non-prescription drugs that people do on their own. Therapy, which I fully support and agree with, but there's all this stuff that keeps us stuck, I believe. And with your method, those, I want to say spiritual methods of healing, holistic, what history? I know a lot of the history of the Western, but what history does this holistic medicine or this holistic healing have? Like, where does it go back to? How long ago?
Yeah, I think a very broad general answer to that is these modalities, all they do is they reconnect us with the wisdom of our body that has existed for centuries and is built into us. We are designed to regenerate, to restore, to replenish, to heal. Our bodies are incredible, intuitive mechanisms, and they're designed to heal themselves. And I think of it kind of as like when you break, if let's say you broke your leg, all the doctor does is puts a cast on your leg. and your leg is actually healing itself.
That's true.
Right.
You know, but the cast is holding this space of support for the body to do what it intuitively knows what to do. And so that's what I think about these modalities that I use. And the other thing I love about the modalities that I use is it's bringing people back to their own authority. A lot of trauma is rooted in the fact that something overwhelmed us and violated us. And it doesn't mean it was like a person, but an experience violated our sense of boundary, our sense of safety. And so by using those modalities, and different modalities work with different people because different survival mechanisms are on replay with people who have trauma. And so I like these modalities because it helps people find that no one else is healing them. You know, the power is in them. It's just holding that supportive space. And also witnessing. Witnessing is a huge component because when we have felt violated, a lot of times it's because there was no witness in our experience. There was no witness to our experience, to our pain, to our overwhelm, or whatever it may be. And so healing is about being witnessed while you're doing that healing work.
So essentially, I love spirituality because everything can be metaphorical, but essentially you're a cast. You're just there as a support system, and the client or the person who needs to be healed essentially heals himself. And it's interesting because you talked about your family pretty much waking you up to what the real situation was with your ex. And I feel like it's really important to have family like that, or even a group of friends around you that metaphorically are a cast to just kind of keep you in line when you steer off the direction.
You fall out of line.
Yeah, you fall out of line.
Yeah, and too, also, like, my mom's not she's not the type of mom that tells me her opinion very often. She's actually the opposite. And it's kind of irritating sometimes because I'll ask her, advice, and she'll say, I think you should do what you think is good. Or what's going to make you happy? And I'm like, right. I don't know. I need your help. And so for her to have said that, it carried a lot of weight for me. But actually, just before this, I was recording with two of my best friends, and that's what we are for each other. We're sober sisters, but we're just each other's cast. We're each other's witness. And we know how to make statements like that when we're like, hey, this is what I'm observing. But there's such safety in it when we're getting feedback of what people are observing about our experience, because the safety lies in the fact that they don't have skin in the game. Like they're going to support you in your experience no matter what, whether you take their advice or not. They're not motivated by their own advice giving. They're just motivated by wanting you to align with your truth. And so having friends that you feel safe with in that way is really important.
I'd like to add that I really appreciate and like the fact that this healing provides, like you said, like control back into people's lives. Because when trauma, and I know, and I say this from experience and even recent experience, where when trauma happens to you, it feels like you lose control of everything, where things just happen all around you, and you feel helpless. You feel like you can't do anything sometimes, and sometimes you can't. And that's, in my opinion, that's the worst part. When you just sit there and you can't do anything about it, life's just happening. But what I like again is that you're helping people get that strength and that confidence back to take ownership and control of their life, to move forward and maybe make those good choices, and have them understand that, okay, I went through this, but I'm healing and I'm okay. And based off what I've learned, I can move on with my life. And so I just wanted to add that that's a great tool that you are teaching and helping people with. And that's giving them that control back, because when you lose it, I mean, it sometimes does feel like the end of the world to one.
Yeah. And that's why too, healing trauma, or just healing in general, it is about restoring trust with self, because a lot of time, and that's why you hear inner child healing a lot. But inner child healing, what it's really about is like, we all have this little child inside of us, because if you really think about early childhood experiences, that's where a lot of powerlessness happens.
Right.
Because we don't have that authority in ourselves. We have to listen to a lot of authoritative figures. We're taught to just, be submissive to the way things are, the way the systems are, the way the school systems are, the way our family systems are, all of these things that we exist in. And we just have to accept and adapt. So if we're in a system that's not our truth, that's not authentic to our nature, we have to, we develop adaptive mechanisms in early life. And so as we become adults, it's not saying you had a bad childhood, but every person has some level of trauma from their childhood, because they were in for a majority of people, there's some dynamic of a system that they had to adapt to that was not authentic to their nature. And so when you become an adult, it's about restoring trust in the sense of like, I can show up authentically and I will be safe. Because in childhood, you had to show up and adapt who you were in order to feel safe. And I mean, there's so many different examples of that, but like, let's say you were like the really outgoing one and you were goofy and loud and whatever. Well, you got, scolded at school, you got reprimanded by your family, whatever it may be. Well, you learned you had to shrink yourself to feel safe, to feel connected. So then later in life, it's all about healing that and letting that inner child out again to be the loud, outgoing, playful person. And then it could be the opposite for other people. Some people might have been really loud and outgoing. Maybe that's that was their adaptive strategy in order to feel seen and heard and safe and accepted, but it's not true to their nature. And so as you become an adult, it's about listening to that inner wisdom of why you're behaving a certain way. And really, it's like that little child inside of us just wants to trust someone. And it's about trusting your self-leadership moving forward. And there'll be days I'll be like walking and I'll get a little activation internally. I'll feel the activation, like maybe my heart rate will go up or something, or maybe going to a social event or something. And when that happens, I've learned, okay, what's showing up inside? And so sometimes I'll literally talk to like my inner girl and I'll say, what are you worried about right now? And sometimes she's like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to look stupid, or they're not going to, maybe I'm like, I love self-expression. I love like dressing up and, wearing funky outfits and stuff. And sometimes I feel totally safe doing that because I have secure relationships with people. But if it's like new people, sometimes that little girl is like, oh my gosh, like what if we're not safe with these people? And safety is so much more than physical safety. If you think about keeping a child safe, you're not just worried about keeping them physically safe. You're worried about making them feel emotionally safe, safe expressing themselves. And a lot of us too, that's the other component of trauma. A lot of us, especially in our culture, did not learn how to feel our feelings in a safe way. So just feeling our feelings is overwhelming to our system because we were never taught how to feel in a way that was safe, that we never were taught how to regulate our emotional experiences. So a lot of us, again, come up with these adaptive strategies when we're feeling an emotion that's too much for us. We maybe start to disconnect from it. And then that just like perpetuates the dysregulation in our system.
It's as if we were like programmed to not talk about our emotions, right? That's kind of how it feels like we've all been brought up. Like you can't talk about your weaknesses. It's all about strength, and people need to understand that weaknesses make your strengths if you can identify it. And that's the way society is. They make you feel like if you show weakness, you're not worthy. And that's why I feel like a lot of people close up on that and they don't speak on those things.
I mean, I feel like especially with us guys, because I was going to say like we said, we grew up, we've known each other since high school. And I mean, we played sports in high school and there's that locker room talk. We poke at each other's traumas, you know, and if you if you show kind of reaction to that, then, you know, something's wrong with you. Like you're supposed to be hardened and be able to take that, you know,
exactly,
kind of be desensitized to it.
And if you show sensitivity, it's even worse. They come on you even worse. So
I was going to add though
about that in a feminine masculine dynamic too.
Mm-hmm.
The masculine wound of that influences the feminine wound because women feel deeply, you know, and in relationships, women, the masculine is like the container energy. The woman is the wild, you know, wild wave-like, you know, water-like energy inside of that when you bring a union together. And so the masculine wound of not being able to feel or learning how to not feel or learning how to shut off from feeling, when a woman is so in that power of feeling, a man is like, no.
Relax.
Like it is. So if a woman is expressing a feeling like this made me feel disappointed, it's like the wound of the masculine is like defense instead of let me be a strong, safe space to witness this feminine in her and in her emotion. And that's really, you know, like there's a lot of in that because culture is like that. That's why there's so much wounds within the union of masculine and feminine. That's why you see relationships ending so much, is because we each carry our separate wounds that are all influenced by society and systems, you know. But sorry, one of y'all were going to say something.
Oh no, I was going to say, like you were saying, the wounds that they carry. I feel like sometimes those wounds are inflicted as a child. And you talked about the inner child and conditioning, and I like the term you said, adaptive strategies. When I was a kid, from my experiences, in order to, I feel like I had this relationship with my parents where you had to do something. You had to be a A student in school, and then you get a prize. You know, you had to be number one in whatever you did, and then you get a prize. So I was almost conditioned to be the best because I get a reward, almost like a dog. You get a treat after, you know. So I felt like that set the bar high in my interaction in society, to where it wasn't until later where I realized that like the moment has no real expectations for you. You know, you can just be, and you don't need to be the best all the time. Just do your best. So I feel like I don't know where I heard this from or where I read this, but the moment a child starts to feel embarrassed is the moment they lose their innocence, because then they start to, you know, be a certain way and not really express themselves genuinely as they would if, you know, they don't even know what embarrassment is. They don't even know what that sensation is. So growing up, being in that society and not having any witnesses to let them know that, hey, that's not normal. You know, it's okay to have gone through that, but I'm sorry that happened to you. If you don't have any witnesses like that, let's say you're just stuck with the same people that run those same patterns and you continue on with those adaptive strategies, that just kind of desensitizes you to that trauma and you kind of normalize and keep going with that, right? So that wound isn't even really being treated.
It's just a scab.
Yeah, it's a scab. You sometimes it gets picked again, and then it just kind of gets to be a deeper, bigger scab. Right?
It's a scab that never heals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also too, like, well, I've in a book on trauma I read once, it talks about shame and how it's a natural thing for us to feel shame. It's divinely organized experience, because when we feel shame as a young child, well, as a child, we depend on our parents for survival. So anytime that shame kicks in, which we feel when, we notice mom's really stressed out and she's not paying attention to me. Well, we start to internalize that. We start to feel shame, but it's there to indicate us or to cue us, let me reestablish connection because I need that to survive. But unfortunately, as children, we don't have the discernment yet. Everything we experience is just truth. It's just reality. So if you have a parent that's emotionally unavailable, you start to internalize that as a message. It might be that I'm unlovable, or I'm unworthy, or I'm too much. Or maybe it's something like they're really emotionally unavailable. So I had to, whatever it may be, I had to get straight A's to finally get acknowledgement from my parent. Mm-hmm. So you might have internalized a message of, I have to work hard for connection. I have to work hard to be the best. Or I have to be the best in order to be seen and connected to someone. And those early relationships influence the pattern of our relationships moving forward, how we're going to experience our intimate relationships. Our family dynamics and our societal conditioning influences that. That's why when you get into relationships, they're so exposing. They exposed all of those wounds, and it takes two very conscious people to walk through that, to walk through witnessing each other's wounds and not taking it personally, like seeing your partner being insecure in the relationship, knowing that you're providing security as best you can, but still witnessing them in that wound. So that's one element. And the other thing, what you were saying, made me think of, when I teach trauma healing, I love to inform people, healing trauma is going to be a process of redefining the language that you use. So redefining what being the best is. You have to redefine that. You have to redefine what is success, redefining what is connection, what is safety actually mean. When you're healing, is it just about like, oh, my physical needs are met, I shouldn't have any complaints, there's food on the table, I have a car, I have a roof over my head? Is that what safety is? Or is safety being able to be really in a wound and to be witnessed by someone and to have space held for you to feel like you're being seen and heard? You have to really start, like for me personally, consistency. The relationships in my life have to have consistency to them. If they don't, it's not attractive to me anymore, because I've healed a lot of traumas. I've healed my early childhood traumas to where inconsistency, I'm not going to work hard to get a consistent energy from somebody. The reason I worked hard for that before is because of my own wounds. But now I'm not going to do that. Like I give people grace. Everyone has bad days. Everyone goes through hard challenges. And when you have a secure connection with someone, you can give that grace because you've formed a template. You've formed something with them of how they truly show up, where, and that's what I rely on is people. I have my own definitions of what safety is. And if I don't receive that in relationships, and the other key point too, is I don't ask for things that I'm not willing to give or be in my relationships. Like I'm not just talking about romantic, but like friendships, family dynamics, consistency. I'm consistent. I'm consistent with my energy, with my mood. It doesn't matter how bad my day is. I will still greet you with a smile. And that's because I'm consistent, because I know how to regulate my emotions. And that's something that's valuable to me, you know? And so if I'm not doing that, someone really knows, oh, hey, I need to put my arm around her, you know, and it'll be safe to do that because I know she'll be receptive, because they have a reliable template of my energy, you know? And so that's what I value from others.
Have you seen the movie Split? I think it's a James McAvoy.
I've seen it, yeah.
I think so, actually.
He's got like that split personalities.
Yeah, all that.
The very extreme.
It's crazy movie.
Yeah.
But how it relates to what we're talking about is he targets people that haven't really gone through any trauma, right? And there's this idea that he has where the people who have gone through trauma are more evolved because they had to adapt in order to survive because of that trauma. And it seems like a pattern that I'm observing is the people who have gone through the trauma are the people with the tools and the people that are aware of, you know, these adaptive strategies that people have had, and the conditioning from your upbringing and the definitions that really weren't the real definitions that you believed in growing up. Do you think that people have to go through, you know, some shit or some trauma in order to be able to be aware of this? Or are some people just keen to this and bypass the going through the hell stuff to be able to be in this enlightened?
To kind of add on, there's examples of, let's say, you have a cousin that just keeps messing up in life, but somehow they keep nothing happens to them, you know, like they still live in the life or whatever. But then you think, you're like, dude, something's got to happen to them. That way they can learn or they can become a better person or so on and so forth, you know, but something never happens. So yeah, bouncing to what he was asking, like, do we need to go through these situations in our life in order for us to have an understanding? Or you think, like, sometimes we wake up in the morning, we're like, oh crap, I need to change my ways.
I mean, there's like multiple ways I could answer that, because, you know, on a spiritual level and what I believe about like incarnating and, you know, coming here to experience, like I call it life curriculum, you know, our souls come here for this life's curriculum, like what this life is going to do to evolve our soul. And so like some people, they're not going to reach certain levels of consciousness in this life because that's not what they chose for this path. And that's just kind of more what I've come to believe. You know, I live in recovery communities. I work with a lot of recovering addicts, and there's definitely a spectrum of the level of consciousness that people reach. And for some people, they have, you know, for some people, getting sober and just, you know, kind of staying sober, that's enough for this lifetime. You know, that's already a huge, they've already gone through a huge evolution in that experience. For me, no. For me, I mean, for me, everything I take as a lesson, I take as a way to evolve and expand and to grow in consciousness. And it's very relative, you know, because I think a lot of people are desensitized to how they might be influenced by culture, society, systems. You know, it goes back to what I said, we don't know what we don't know about ourselves. And the hardest thing to learn is the things we think we already know. And so a lot of people don't even question the way things are. Actually, a lot of people are so identified as certain things, they just believe that's who they are. You know, like, you know, I'm just a shy person. I've always been shy. Well, it's like maybe you became shy because you had early life experiences that you learned to shut down and not use your voice. But as far as you can consciously remember, you've always been shy. So you're just highly identified as I'm introverted. You know, people like to define themselves a lot, and I do too. But I try not to hold on to any of those things because I really like to stay open to like, what do I not know about myself yet? And I don't go like, right. I don't like desperately try to like figure things out. I let the lessons come through the experiences I'm having, you know, without force, really. But I don't think so. But I think everyone in life can take experiences to either expand them and to help them grow, or they can just take it as like something very physical, you know, and not do anything with it. And that's why some people, you know, they keep doing the same thing over and over, and it feels exhausting, but it's like, maybe that's exactly what they're supposed to be going through, or maybe that's the exact experience that they're meant to be in.
Right. It's one of those things that you could remind yourself, like, I like to say, don't doubt the timing, because, you know, life, I've noticed there's timing of things that are perfect. And then like the conversation we had earlier, sometimes things are just well aligned for you to move forward. And then there's some things that, you know, the timing of everything's just in a way, it's just a cluster, and you
gotta sit it out and like
work harder to work your way through.
I guess it's like also important to constantly try to push yourself to learn more about yourself, because I notice that as people get older, they kind of settle with things they feel they are. Like you said, like, I'm a shy person. Well, you can break out of that and be more than that if you try to push yourself to learn more about yourself. And I believe that in your most uncomfortable moments is where you learn more about yourself. But when people get into those uncomfortable moments, they tend to regress and put themselves back in a hole and say, no, this is who I am, and I can't do that. So, yeah, just going back to what you said, I think it's important for people to find the strength to constantly learn about themselves and learn what they're capable of, because it's really, when you put it down, like, yeah, society could be influencing us and things like that, but it also comes down to you boxing yourself in, and we have to learn how to break out of that box.
To piggyback what you said, Jermaine, too, my mentor once told me, it's about finding that sweet spot if you want to grow. Don't be too comfortable, but don't put yourself in a position where you're pulling your hair out. Put yourself in an uncomfortable situation that you know you can manage and grow from. So just to add on to what you said.
When did I say that?
You said that, because in trauma we call it a window of tolerance, and it's to heal trauma or to heal disempowerment, you have to move towards it, but in a comfortably uncomfortable way.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say there's key in the trauma, right? Like when you do your trauma work, it's more like you said, approaching your trauma in a careful way, instead of, you know, focus on something else, you know, meditate about something else. Don't think about your trauma. So I feel like to grow, the key is in the trauma, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, avoidance perpetuates your trauma. Avoidance is an adaptive strategy. So if you avoid self, you're just perpetuating disempowerment, dis-ease, disorder, distress. That's where, even on a physical level, that's where all of that comes from, is, you know, the avoidance, the avoidance of self, the avoidance of doing the work. You know, and that's why too, when you talk about medication, it's a numbing out. It's a silencing of that internal cue. And I believe in medication. I believe in, you know, the use of psychedelics. I'm a sober person, and I think there's a place for all of it. Because some people's traumas are so dense, they need the medication to support, to be that cast. Some people's dysregulation in their system or disorder in their system is so dense and heavy that they need that cast from medication. And I always like to empower people to, you know, seek out places and resources that will offer that as the cast and take it off when it's time. You know, but that's the problem with our society, is no one takes it, like people don't take it off when it's time. And when you don't take it off when it's time, it further disrupts you. It continues to disrupt you, or it creates a whole nother, trickle effect of something that will have consequences. Even they say there's no such thing as side effects. There's only effects. That's just, and they like to trick us with that. Right. There's only effects. So it's either affecting me in a positive way, in a supportive way, in an expansive way, or it's affecting me in a constrictive way, in a way that's inhibiting my growth.
Right. So, I mean, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I see it, like you said about medication, people are kind of just programmed to use medication and believe that's the only crutch they have to get past it. But I believe that medication's a tool, like you said, it's a cast. And in that moment when you're taking that medication, it's for you to possibly have a clearer mind to handle like the said trauma or anything like that. But I think people aren't doing that when it comes to medication. They take the medication and all of a sudden they're worry-free and they think that's the cure. And they're so dependent on the medication without actually addressing it. And there's really the only rules or the instructions they're following is on that medicine label saying just take 2 a day. And
it becomes another problem in itself.
And the part of that part of those instructions actually to try and heal while you're medicated. That's how, like you said, that's how you remove the cast. And this is the conspiracy side of me speaking, like big pharma doesn't want you to do that.
And if you think about it too, doctors, not all doctors are trauma informed. Not all doctors look at the full system, the whole multi-dimensional. Actually, the West is like, I don't even think they do this on these, like the West, the fact that our medical system is we treat the brain here, the liver here, the heart here. Like you go to all these separate doctors.
Right.
So all these separate doctors are giving you all these different medications, all with their own list of side effects. And they're all continuing to disrupt things, and there's not a lot of doctors that are really like, when I say systems, I mean, everything is a system, and it all influences our experience. And a majority of my trauma comes from the medical system. The trauma that I had during my birth experience was because the first thing they did when I went in there is they wanted to dope me up on fentanyl, a recovering addict, and it's like, that's what they're trained to do, actually. Right. So it's not that they were harming me intentionally, but it's a system in place that nobody questions. I mean, I'm not saying nobody, because there's lots of people, questioning and speaking out on their experiences. And again, there's always a time and place for those things, but it's not the majority experience, and it's concerning. And it's actually, look at how many kids are prescribed ADHD medications. Yeah. Prescription meth is what they're prescribed. And that is the ADHD is an adaptive response to trauma. The symptoms of ADHD are adaptive mechanisms to trauma. And so when you put methamphetamines or a stimulant on someone who already has extreme disruption in their system, what exactly do you think is going to happen? I mean, and we wonder why addiction is rampant in our society. It's things like that. And obviously you can tell I'm so passionate about it, but big pharma actually funds medical school. They fund the studies that then go into how doctors are trained. So doctors are trained in a lot of medicine to prescribe, to identify symptoms and then to prescribe. That's kind of, and it could be changing and evolving, but that's how the Western medicine system has been.
To treat the symptom, not to cure the disease.
Not to get to the root of the issue.
Right.
So do you guys
prescribing Band-Aids? Really, that's all they're doing. When you're out of Band-Aids, they
That's all
come
it
back
is.
for more.
do you guys
That's
think
why they always say
Adderall?
come
You
back in
think,
2 to 3 weeks if you still
you
feel
think
the same.
Adderall will be harder to get in the future? You think it'll get easier to get? You'll be easier to get in the future.
It's already easy to get.
I mean, yeah, but like I was going to
Go to the
say,
gym.
we're living in a time where you could get
Adderall?
prescribed meth like easily, you know. But I was wondering, you think they're going to start to regulate that? Is it going towards an easier path to get that kind of stuff?
I mean, the number of people that are so quick to say, oh, it's my ADHD, it's my ADD. I mean, people say that like it's nothing. I forget sometimes just because I'm really surrounded by so many holistic people, but then I'll go out around, normies and I'm just like, oh my gosh, yeah, like there's still a lot of work to be done here. Because sometimes I think, oh gosh, what am I even doing? Like, why am I even down this path? Because I just surround myself by it. So I'm always hearing it. I'm hearing other like-minded people. And sometimes I think, what am I, everyone knows this stuff already. But then I have experiences where I'm like, no, absolutely not. Like there's still a lot of systems and beliefs that we need to dismantle in our society that are keeping us zombies, like we're zombies. We're just like, when we just are highly medicated all the time, like we're not living in our truths,
I'd like to ask you, because you mentioned about people labeling like, oh, I have ADD, and that's why they do, take the medication.
Like self-diagnosing, right? A lot of people do that.
But one thing that I've noticed is that sometimes people, they accept it. They identify themselves that that's how it is, and that's what they have, and that's how they are, and that's just why things happen. And it's like, oh, well, it's my ADHD, and it's like, well, what are you doing to improve it? And it's like, well, that's just how I am. It's like, okay. Yeah. It seems like people, they take that identification of ADD or ADHD that they have, and I don't know, it's like any mistake that they make, or if they are procrastinating in any way, it's like, oh, it's okay, it's because of this. And it's like, well, you're not doing anything to improve it. You're just accepting the fact that you have it, and that's it. I mean,
and taking the medication as a crutch.
I've come across a few. I mean, it's a very handful amount of people, but is this something that maybe you have seen, in the world?
100%.
Just accept it.
I mean, I think it goes back to kind of what I said in the beginning, because a diagnosis is another way of identifying. So you can identify with qualities of character. You can identify with the roles you play in your life, mom, daughter, sister, friend. You can identify with diagnosis. And I work with extreme levels of trauma where identifying with a diagnosis can be so essential and beneficial for healing, for getting insurance support for your healing. But the thing is, I think it's important for people to remember a diagnosis is a label on top of a box of symptoms.
Right.
So it's just a bunch of symptoms that have been organized into a box, and then there's a label to define it. And that is what a diagnosis is. And the reason it's there is the same reason a majority of systems were created in the first place. It's to help you organize your experience so that you can move through it, so that you can get into what's happening and then expand out of it. So for me, that's like, I mentioned a lot of this in that one episode I created, because I see it in the recovery community too. A lot of people are like, oh, I have social anxiety. I have social anxiety, or they say I have OCD, or, people just misuse these terms, or they aren't misusing them, but they're identifying it and then they're just jumping in the box and they're staying there. Mm-hmm. And I was personally somebody who was involuntarily placed in that box. I was told I had ADD my entire life. I had ADHD. I was a problem student. I was too loud, all these things. My mom was so against it, any medication or anything like that. But then my parents divorced. My mom was a single mom, and I was failing all my classes in high school, and, you know, her hands were tied. And again, the system of medicine, the pediatricians, it's normal. This is going to change her life. This is going to be great. And it did. It achieved exactly what they wanted it to achieve. So in that case, it was a success story when they started prescribing me the medications. It was a success story because their version of success is what I achieved. I started making good grades. It stripped me of my personality. I was the quiet girl in class. I was now hyper focused on what I was doing. But was it really successful? No, it wasn't. It boxed me into their system.
Yeah.
And it took me years. I'm telling you, years to heal from that, because I mean, again, my system was why was I having a hard time in school? Well, I don't know. My home life just completely collapsed around me. My parents got divorced. My whole friend group shifted and changed around me, collapsed around me. What are the two things that really matter to a teen? Your home and your friends. So like that was all trauma. And whatever my parents were going through stress, you know, and I was internalizing that stress. And then what do? You throw a prescription methamphetamine on somebody, a child who already is going through trauma. And then what the other message that you give the child, I remember after that getting all these accolades in school, like, good job, Dacey. Look how much Dacey's applying herself now. And what that taught me was that my value, my worth, my capacity for success was all in this pill, was something outside of me.
It seems like you sacrificed a lot of your, you know, the long term. I mean, just for the short term. I mean, even though it was high school and, you know, it's a few years, but I mean, yeah, you got the grades, but like you said, it affected you in the years to come, and it took you a long time to recover from it.
And like also the players of the whole environment are validating, you know, the result of the medication, right?
Yeah, so every authority figure is validating it, and yeah, it's sad, because the problem there too is what essentially is at the root of addiction is a person with trauma who has an overwhelming internal experience. Their internal system of their and how their body and their body's mechanism of experiencing life is in chaos. It's completely dysregulated. And so someone with trauma, when you give them medication, you're teaching them that a substance is going to regulate your experience. And for me, that was my first experience of that. And then, you know, it influenced my addiction. It influenced the fact that I learned that I could use all these perfect little different chemical things outside of me to just regulate all these different experiences that I'm having. Instead of learning how to regulate from the inside out, I started regulating from the outside in. And when you're in that state, you're always going to be controlled by something outside of you, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful.
Aren't those commercials though? You see those commercials about the medication of, like, you know, treating your ADHD. They're pretty creepy, aren't they? Like, I watched them. I was like, how do people think this is cool? And as always, at the end, they describe all these weird side effects. Like, is that worth it?
But they make it seem like you're going to be so happy when you take this pill.
Right.
You're going to be so happy.
The videos of them running through the fields and everything's like, is it worth it?
Yeah, like all those side effects, is it really worth that small treatment? You know,
it's also like, because I've seen it, like when a parent is genuinely trying to find help for their kid, they fall victim to the doctors that, you know, lose them in the medical jargon that they're not really familiar with. Yeah. And that's intimidating for someone that's not used to that dialect. So they feel cornered, and, you know, like you said, the language that they use validates the usage of these medication, and you're seeing the accolades. Right. And then, I mean, I always refer and bring things back to the Matrix, but the agents kind of, do their part to keep you in the system. And
Yeah.
I feel like it's common sense I feel like common sense is another word for peer pressure, so
Yeah.
I feel like
I've never heard of that one, Jarrell. Common sense is another word for peer pressure.
yeah. So
people say it's just common sense. Do it.
Yeah, it's a way to kind of keep you in a certain box of behavior.
But for us, we're like, wait, that's a red flag. Like
Right.
Common sense, we're like, hold on, wait, let me wait. Let me pause here.
Yeah. But also I think they take advantage of like the parents who are just desperately looking to just help their child, so they know exactly what to target and say, hey, your child has this. And as a parent, you don't want to hear those things. So you're just like, well, what can I do to get rid of it? And take this. And as a parent,
okay, yeah, you're
you
like,
want
whatever
the best
it
for your
takes.
child. Yeah, you want the best for your child. And all the, let's say, common sense goes out the door, like your own common sense, not the common sense the society wants to feed you, but your own independent thinking thought process is out the door when they start throwing these big words at you.
Yeah. And it also goes back to the systemic influence of things.
Yes.
Or lack of systemic influence, because my mom, she was going through her own trauma. She just got divorced. She was a newly single mother with 3 kids. She hadn't worked in 15 years, It's like her daughter's struggling. So she did the best she could. She did the best, made the best decision that she could with what she had. But it just goes back to like what systems are in place to support the parents, to support them to have discernment, to have other options. And unfortunately, because of the way that the nature of big pharma and how money influences these things, how lobbyists influence laws, like things like that, there's not as many resources for the alternative as there is for just using your insurance, going to your pediatrician and getting prescribed the meds. To find a holistic option, it's going to be a lot more money out of your pocket. That's not, it's not realistic for a lot of people. They just don't have that resource. And that's why, eventually talks about healing trauma have to stop being about the individual and the individual experience. And it has to move up into the systems that are in place, because it's like, how many more addicts are we going to need to see die to finally realize like there's an issue in our system? How many more kids are going to be diagnosed with ADHD and put on these prescriptions until we see there's an issue in our system, our school system.
Exactly.
There's just, and I'm not there yet in my work and like my advocacy, but I definitely see myself going there because, it can be really like heart aching to work with so many individuals and to try to empower them to find their own system and to find their own path. But it's really like, how many times are we going to do that until we start collectively waking up and saying, we need to dismantle the systems that are in place right now that are not working anymore.
Right. And it's also up to the person, right? Because I was going to ask, when you're trying to help somebody, the person needs to want to be helped because of the trauma responses. Some of them are avoidance, but what I'm used to and what I grew up seeing was being defensive, feel like they're being attacked. So they come back kind of more aggressive and then try to start poking at you, trying to turn it on you somehow when you approach them about something that you observe and that you've seen in them, that's worth talking about, worth going down and having a deeper conversation about. So with that said, like, how do you try to break through those people? Let's say it's a loved one, hypothetically, your mom spoke about your ex, and what if you became defensive about it? Would your mom just leave you and let you kind of live your journey? Or as a healer, like, are there ways to try to knock on that door or stand out that door and wait till they're ready because I had a conversation with someone and they said, in order to wake people up, you don't force them, you kind of have to wait for them to wake up. And then that's when you can start to do the work. But if it's a loved one, you feel the urge to want to, hey, there's a better life. There's a better mindset, better belief system.
It's the saying that my old mentor used to say too, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
I remember that. I remember saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is hard because when you're talking about a loved one, there's certain dynamics we have with people where you'll never give up on them. Mm-hmm. But I think that's why I love spirituality, because spirituality gives me dependence on something that's bigger than me, that I know has more power than I do. And so when it's a loved one, I have a lot of resource at this point. I have a lot of resource to offer people guidance. Even if I'm not the one to lead them through it, I can offer them resource and suggestion and things to do. But like you said, not everyone's ready. And the lack of readiness can a lot of times, like you said, be a trauma response and a survival mechanism. And so, I've learned like I can only participate enough. I can only determine my levels of participation with people like that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's loved ones that there's an unconditional love that I have for them, where I'll always be here. I'll always be on the other end of the phone. There's a lot of addiction throughout my family and extended family, active and recovering. And it's hard. It's hard when you see a lot of people struggling with something that you have a solution for. But it's kind of like there's a saying, your bottom is when you stop digging. And some people are going to dig further than others. But I think the best thing you can do is just embody the message that you have and be that message in your energy, in the way that you interact with people. Even actually, that's what makes a good therapist, a good doctor, a good anything. It's not the actual knowledge or skill set they have. It's how they embody it. Mm-hmm. It's how it is fully in them and how you experience that. That's why, like, you might go to two doctors for this. They give you the same response for something, but one of them, you're just like, that felt safe, or that felt really good.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to be for people in my family. And it's a process or people that I love, because especially being in recovery, I see people die, a lot, actually. It's really, I was literally at a celebration of life yesterday for someone who really impacted my life in an amazing, incredible way. But it's learning the humility of like, could I have prevented anything?
Right.
Like, do we really have that power to prevent someone's experience? And I think the more we try to control someone's experience, the more diseased we become.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's more learning how to give certain things to the power that I don't have, and asking for guidance of where I can be of service and of influence. But certainly you cannot give somebody something they're not ready to receive, but you can be such a presence in their life that they know that you're that soft landing when they're ready. And I have experience with that. Like, there are people, that I have gotten calls from that I had been waiting for and I had been praying about, sometimes for years. And, that is like a testimony to like the belief that I have, that you have to just kind of
it's trust, like you're still guiding them in a way. You're still saying, I'm here for you when you need me, and you're still helping them. But once they're ready to take that next step, it's like, okay, Lynn, let's go. It's like, you're there, you're ready. Now they're ready. And all right, let's go on to phase 2, I guess,
Also, like we talked with Craig, because we had some strongman on, podcast, and we were asking about how to give someone advice in the weight room. And he was like, the way to be impeccable with your advice is, you know, it has to be undeniable. So if you're squatting like 6 plates, if you go up to someone who's squatting like 1 or 2 plates and you give them advice, it's more believable than if you're squatting about the same weight. You know? Yeah. So like you said, if you're that beacon to them and they see it in your life, like your life is turned around, you're faced with adversities, but how you handle it is remarkable to them, then that defensive mechanism kind of gets turned down a little bit, and they start to get a little curious. And like you said, approach the trauma in a safer manner instead of, you know, some people, especially with family, because like you mentioned, they have that urge to want to unconditionally help them. So it almost gets shoved down their throat of, oh, this is the way, you know.
Which
so
is
kind of just being a
disservice, because when you do that, all you're doing is you're violating somebody. You're violating the protective mechanisms inside of them, and you're making them get even more defensive because you're violating something that's functioning in them to try to keep them safe, you know? And so it is like, there's a saying, sometimes you deliver the message and sometimes you are the message. And I love what you just shared too, because it was actually making me think about social media, honestly. And I'm like, that's why I love like social media, because it's, you know, it gets so much like negativity, but there's also a huge community on social media that uses it for a storyboard of like, let me show you what spirit is doing in my life. Like, let me show you what transformation is happening in my life. Let me let you witness. And it's, you know, for some people, they don't see it that way, and they're maybe receive a totally different message. And that's always more of a reflection on them and their relationship with themselves. But it's like, I love what you said about just making it like undeniable. And I really like think about my life, and my life doesn't seem necessarily extraordinary, but to me it is. And anyone who's been watching my continual transformation, like they know, and they come to walk with me, you know, people do. And that's like another testimony, is like, you know, witnessing people receive from you just embodying the message, you know?
I like that. So meditation. Let's segue into meditation. And you mentioned that was one of the practices that you use. There's a lot of forms of meditation. And I wanted to know, is there a specific meditation practice for trauma, or are they all kind of effective into the healing process?
There's all kinds of meditations for trauma. Because again, like everybody's body's survival mechanisms are different, and everybody's dysregulation is different. Everybody's capacity to move into their trauma is on a different spectrum. So really, it's like you need a lot of different things to work with. And some people aren't going to be able to use certain modalities at certain times. And I do a lot of different like guided meditations with my clients. I love hypnotherapy. That's a great way to kind of reprogramming subconscious beliefs and help people like embody their truths a little bit. And I always work on like the scripts with my clients, but also, you know, there's like just so many different meditations you can do, like breath work, breath journeying, like doing different breath work journeying is a huge form of meditation that I love, because it's for me, it was like my gateway into deeper meditation and deeper healing. When I could never really just sit and meditate. For me, breath work is medicinal to me. Like I think like breath work is medicine, and it really has such an impact. And there's so many different forms of breath work that can impact your nervous system in different ways. And trauma is a nervous system issue. Trauma is in the nervous system. And then based on the nervous system, it trickles out into the internal organs and how they function, and how you regulate all of the organ functions has to do with how you're regulating in your nervous system. So, and people think regulating a nervous system means that you're just calm all the time, and that's not the case. No, it's about, okay, I'm getting activated. Let me regulate that activation. We want to be activated. We want our body to cue us when something's alerting us, even if we're excited. Like, have you ever felt excited and gotten a little anxious? It's because you're getting excited and then it kind of moves into that. But then if you have tools, you can kind of down regulate. Right. And then same thing is down regulating and learning when you're going into that disassociated state of like tuning out, numbing out. And then where is that? And that's where determining that window of tolerance is. But I love doing like some of my favorite meditations. I love doing parts work, which comes from internal family systems. And going back to that movie you talked about, Split, like it's split or identity, any identity disorder or like a personality disorder is really just like an extreme, like a really, really disordered system of really defined separate parts. But we all have different parts in us, Right. It's like we all have the parts that, protect us, or the parts that try to control everything, or that inner voice that criticizes everything we do. We all have and then we all have that internal self, that like leadership part of self.
Right.
And so I do a lot of meditations around that and I do a lot of somatic meditations. So meditations with the sensory experience that happens both from external sensory cues that you're intaking and sensory cues that are coming from the inside. So like, what does it feel like? Like you'd be amazed, just I feel like everyone's experienced different levels of trauma, but when extreme complex trauma or developmental trauma, people are really, really disconnected from their bodies and their felt sense. So a lot of the meditations I do are around familiarizing yourself with that felt sense. So like just noticing what does my heartbeat feel like inside my body? Right. And a lot of times that's what's guiding our experience. And really our survival responses are just different patterns of those internal cues. So it might be like my heart rate increases a lot. I start to perspire, sweat, and then my hands go numb. Well, if you're not attuned to that and that's happening, it's scary. Right. You feel like you're dying. You feel like something bad is going to happen, but you're not aware that, okay, this is what my body's doing. It's trying to communicate something to me. So I like to do a lot of meditations around that kind of stuff, around parts work, connecting the parts to the somatic experience. But then I love doing meditations about who is this version of me that's not struggling with this anymore? What do they feel like? What do they look like? How are they interacting with people? Like doing kind of more because sometimes in therapy or in the treatment centers, people can be so focused on what they don't want to feel or what they're feeling, right, that they don't realize they have the capacity to feel another way, right. So I like to get them into, and that's why like psychodrama is an experiential therapy. I don't facilitate it, but it's supposed to be really powerful because people get to play like the warrior and they get to act out the warrior. Well, when you're acting out the warrior, you're feeling in your body that you have the capacity to be the protector, that, things like that. And the body is such a powerful tool. I don't know if it's because I'm just a deep, deep feeler, but the body, everything, how you like, if I was on the podcast and I was just like talking like this, y'all would be like, what's up with her? Like, what, like, is she okay? And our body also is constantly telling us not just our lived experience, but what I'm anticipating to experience, If I'm like this, it's not just saying like, wow, she's probably experienced criticism in her life. It's also saying I'm expecting somebody to shut me down and close me up. Where someone who's, you know, big and bulked up, like you see it in the military too, you know, a lot of veterans and stuff, they walk really postured out. And it's because they're bracing for impact, you know, they're bracing to be confrontational, you know, or to be strong in their stance. So it's amazing how much you can read on someone's body. And I like my meditations are just simply meditating with the body and the felt experience. That's my favorite form. I love breath work. Like I said, chanting is another huge form of meditation that I love, because on a scientific perspective, it stimulates the vagus nerve, which is the brake system to our nervous system. So like when we get overwhelmed, if you have a really strong vagal tone, so like if you think of it like a guitar string, when you tune the guitar, when it's toned, you play and you function well. When it's not toned, it's like wah, 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 you know, and that's kind of how it relates to our nervous system. So I love chanting. And on a spiritual level, you know, we know about the chakra systems, but there's 108 energy lines and points in the body. So when you chant, like when I chant, I follow the tradition of 108 recitation of the chanting. And it's said to open or unlock each of those little energy points. And that's been a tradition for centuries. And it's amazing because the diameter of the sun is exactly 108 times from the earth. And the diameter of the moon is, you know, 108 times from the earth.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah, numbers don't lie.
Sacred number, for sure.
Yeah. One thing that kept popping into my mind as you were explaining with medication is a long time ago, and I'm sure you might have read it or even heard of it. I read the book, The Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle, if I pronounce the name correctly. But
Eckhart Tolle.
What?
I heard.
Tolle.
I'm just
German. But one thing that you were mentioning is, I don't know, you were saying it in your own way, but the way I was translating it and, you know, processing, like in the book, it mentions to be the watcher, you know, to be in the present moment and to be the watcher. So you were kind of saying like, okay, maybe I'm here because I know what's going to come. So you're being the watcher, you know what's expecting, you're being in that present moment. But it's not like you're looking into the future. You're just ready. I don't know. And same thing when it comes with meditation, it's all about being in the moment and being now, not worrying about what am I going to do tomorrow or how am I going to feel tomorrow or even yesterday. It's all about embracing right now and think. I wouldn't say thinking, but just, yeah, that's the best. I got to end it there. That's the best way I can say it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think in the like recovery circles, we learn about prayer and meditation, and there's a saying like prayer is when you ask, or like prayer is speaking to spirit, and meditation is listening to spirit. And so like that's a simplified way for me maybe to kind of shorten it. But even what you were describing, like the power of now, that really correlates a lot to like the parts work, because it's okay, notice what you're feeling in your body. Now notice how you're relating to that. And so then you're starting to identify a part. Maybe there's a part that's judging what you're feeling. You know, so then maybe there's a part of you that wants to turn off what you're feeling. And that's when you start to get all the different, but really noticing. And then there's the part like you were talking about, that's the witness, the observer. And in IFS, they call it the self with a capital S. And in spiritual communities, it's like our highest self. It's our, you know, the
being.
Yeah, it's like our most, you know, profound state of being that is our truth or whatever it may be. So And I think that is like a profound part of meditation, is like we slow down enough to just witness ourselves and then to receive the truth. And another meditation that I love to do is body scanning, like just a guided body scan. That's actually what a lot of the trauma like experts recommend too, because we're always on autopilot. There's only like 1% of us at any given moment functioning from the conscious state. So when you get home, it's really interesting. And that's why I talk a lot about systems, because, if you think about, when is our autopilot mechanism created? Well, it's created in the first 7 years of our life. So what determines how we are going to run on autopilot is our early life experience.
Wow.
And the messages that we're internalizing. And the messages, think about it, from 0 to 7, you don't have a whole lot of conscious memory, but your body, in trauma, they call it implicit memory. It's the memory that's stored in the felt sense, that's imprinted in there. And so that's why I love blending subconscious and somatic, because really they're the same. The subconscious mind lives in the felt sense. And that's why when we tune into the felt sense, we can feel, where does that belief that I'm not lovable come from? Where do I feel it in my body? Where does my body want to collapse? Because your body will show you where that lives inside. And, it happens in our collapsing patterns and in our bracing patterns, where the body braces. And so that's a huge part of the work I do, is like teaching people, where am I collapsing? Where is my body more warm, and where is it more cold? Like, where is it getting less circulation? But that's why I love body scanning, because you could come home from a long day work and be exhausted and go and just sit down and watch Netflix because you're just so zonked out. And then you're just perpetuating that dysregulation, because you're not actually getting real rest. You're getting avoidant rest. You're just avoiding self.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that Netflix is bad or leisure in that way is bad, but a lot of times you're highly activated during the day. This is why I think, most people are desensitized from their trauma, because they're activated all day long. They scarf down their food. They never really digest it. Then they go right back to like highly stimulated work environments. Then they come home, and in order to preserve the body, their body starts to shut down. So they're dysregulated, because they're either really activated or they're like shutting down and going straight to. So that's why doing a simple body scan throughout the day is really powerful, because then you get somatic resource. You get resource from the body to tell you exactly what it needs to regulate itself. So you'll pause. So a lot of times if you come home from work and you sit and you decide, I'm going to literally just start at my forehead and scan down, maybe taking a few conscious breaths, you'll start to notice like what you're feeling, what you need. And then you might go, wow, I feel recharged just by acknowledging the mechanism of the body and what it's trying to do. I'm going to go get some water. And actually, I really want to go outside for a walk and get some sunlight, because, that's going to really replenish my system. So I love body scans, because they're kind of like a disruptor to our autopilot.
I like that.
Right. And as a person who's aware of meditation, like even me, and I would say I used to practice more consistently back like a few years ago, but but I mean, like, even I barely find time to just sit and be quiet, just sit in silence and be able to scan my body, see like, damn, like my heart rate is high. I've been on the move for 2-3 days. I haven't even really taken time to just calm down and de-stress, So it's crazy. And I feel like people don't really get that chance unless there's a blackout or, people,
right.
It happened during the lockdown because people had nothing to do. So, I mean, add that with a blackout, you really finally have to start interacting with your family sometimes, or your pets if you have some.
You know what I've noticed too is with my experiences when I've, like with fitness and health journey, I mean, you sometimes tend to do those body scans too, because you like you mentioned, you're in a high peak during work and everything, and then after work, your body sometimes automatically does shut down. But then that is where you give yourself that scan of like, mentally, I feel fine. If let's say I'm training upper body, how's my, how are my arms feeling? How are my shoulders feeling? Like, I'm good. I'm fine. Maybe I'm a little tired, but mentally I'm okay. So that's where I'll do my body scan, and I tell myself, go to the gym, push yourself. And if you're a little tired, well, at least you're there already. But
you're also going into your body. So like,
yeah, exactly.
That's better than
you're disrupting. And if
you're
like you mentioned, you're disrupting that autopilot. So the autopilot was after work, body shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you're disrupting it, asking yourself, how do I feel so I can go, continually work on myself. And
I've heard of people too that work out, and when they're working out, like let's say you're like lifting weights, like actually visualizing what's happening in the muscles and like really tuning, because there's that, and that what that's doing is it's syncing your consciousness to the multidimensional nature of experiencing life, which is, mind body is one, but it's like consciously becoming aware of that oneness versus like just mentally exerting the body, because then you're kind of disconnecting from the body. And I think that, I think that's why I'm so passionate about body work and awakening to the felt sense of the body. And because, people can get identified with their doing, thinking, oh, I'm doing meditation, but not actually receiving the full connection and attunement. And I think that when you incorporate the body in a very conscious way, then you're reaching a whole nother level of awakening, because people think of the body, I think they just think physical, they just think, oh, the physical, like they say mind, body, spirit. And so I think a lot of people like don't put much emphasis on the physical because they just think it's automatic. Like we're just automatically physical and connected, but we're not awakened to that spiritual consciousness that lives in our felt sense and our embodiment. And I think that is one of the most profound, most spiritual things you can do, because what makes us human? It's like what makes us in this experience. Like there's that saying, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And being sensual and in the senses, to me, being attuned in a conscious way, in an intentional way to the sensory experience is one of the most spiritual things you can do, because that's why we're here. We're here to experience that, and that's why I love it, because the thing is too, a lot of us, like there's so many sayings that correspond to the body, like that gut instinct, or heartbreak or, and things like that. And it's because a lot of times when you look back and people who live with shame and they really beat themselves up for certain experiences, it's they take, even people who are victims of something, they get isolated in their shame because they didn't listen to their gut instinct. Well, it's because they weren't taught to. They weren't taught to trust the cues and the signals of their body. They were taught to just rationalize everything. And sometimes rationalization and the logic is going to be limited compared to the felt sense and the intuitive nature of our bodies, which actually goes back to a question way back when about like, where did these modalities come from? Well, it's like our cultures, our ancestors, every one of our ancestors, it doesn't matter where on the world you are from, they originally listened to that. They were attuned to that. Like there weren't even words like nature in certain cultures, because we are nature. We are these living, breathing, multidimensional organisms, and being attuned to that was just a way of life. But now we have words like trauma and psychotherapy and all these things because we're in a whole system and a whole culture and society that is disconnected from that, and it does not move at the rhythm of that, like way back then, that everyone moved in the rhythm of nature, and we don't do that anymore. Well, our bodies are nature, and there needs to be that rhythm that we live by,
Yeah, that's another thing. The other side of the coin, like you said, social media gets a lot of flack. Going back to the Matrix, it keeps people in the Matrix. But at the same time, there's that community of people that are using it to reach out to other people. In a sense, turning it around and using it for good. But even with that, there's always the other side of the coin, and that's something that rings true, and you hear all the time in spirituality, right? People put a negative connotation on the negative side, but a lot of work gets done in that dark shadow realm or shadow world, which is what you lead people to do with trauma. Because I feel like trauma is, like we mentioned, something that people dislike bringing up. It's not really taboo to talk about it openly. Like we mentioned with the guys, it's something to just keep to yourself, If you bring it up or you're still dealing with it, like, what's wrong with you?
I talk about trauma all day long, and so I'm like, what? People don't talk about it? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with me and Danny's friendship, it was just recently when he would be like, hey, it bugs me when you start, because I joke around a lot, especially with these guys since I grew up with them. But, sometimes my jokes get a little too harsh, and I kind of poke a little too much. And I feel like now with our friendship, he's able to just be like, hey, not today, and I'd be like, okay. But I feel like, personally, in the past, that wasn't really a thing that we had. It was just, hey, take it, you know what I mean? And I would imagine that's the case in a lot of other friend groups, where it's like,
that's growth. That's growth as a friendship. If your friendship can't grow in that positive way, that's a friendship you should drop. That's how I feel. If you can't find friends who can grow with you and respect you opening up and talking about how you feel and what they do and how it affects you, then that's not a worthy friendship to keep. That's just how I've been growing up too. Back then I would talk to Jarrell, and he would say some shit to me. I'm like, yeah, whatever, But then now I wouldn't care to tell him. I was like, dog, dude, shut up. I don't like that.
And same. My growth on the other side was I was very sensitive, overly sensitive about everything.
Yeah,
these two would talk crap on me, and I'm like, stop. And then over time, I just developed that where I'll say something back, and but we don't cross lines, it's just
but if you think about it too, as you heal and you acknowledge, okay, why am I doing that? What's at the root of it? Why am I making those comments? And acknowledging oh, it's because that was how I learned how to connect as a man. And is that authentic to me? And as you're healing, y'all are all defining and learning what your boundaries are around it. Because, that's a thing too with healing. Sometimes for me, at least my experience is when I got sober, I got really serious. I was so serious about everything. And then I had to learn the next layer of healing was learning how to be playful too. I can take my life seriously, and I can take my spiritual path and my healing seriously. But part of that is being spontaneous and playful and joking. But for me, it's learning what is authentic for me. And for me, I am a highly sensitive person, and I don't do well with sarcasm. And I grew up in a extremely sarcastic family, brutally sarcastic. They do all the inappropriate things. And I had to learn what my limitations were with that. And, for the people that, like y'all were saying, for the people that really matter and care, they're willing to evolve with you and go, wow, you want to connect in a different way to me. Instead of, poking me about this girl that I like, saying wow, you really seem to like her. Is it bringing up some fears for you? Or is there some insecurities coming up? How are you navigating dating this woman? That's just an example, but acknowledging instead of like, oh, are you nervous? You're going to look bad, or like, you're going to, F up on this date or whatever. Like noticing like, where is the balance of playfulness and sarcasm? Or is this just a mechanism that's not authentic to me, that's on autopilot that I'm doing?
Right.
That's actually creating a disconnect.
Right.
Because if it's harming someone else, it's creating a disconnect, But I think it's cool that y'all are really open to that, to meeting each other every day.
Yeah. I think for me, part of it was I noticed when I would be talking in a way to someone that I still cringe at some of the things. I look back as I can't believe I said that to someone.
For real, right?
I can't believe I said that. But some points I caught myself, I felt like I was just projecting my own insecurities onto someone. And on that point, I'm passing that energy of that insecurity on that person. Now that person's feeling it. And so what I didn't realize is that maybe that insecurity is now manifesting within that person. And so that's why I strongly believe that words do have power and they have energy. And it depends on how you say it to someone. And it could really affect someone negatively or positively. So that's why I try to watch what I say to people. And when I'm joking, I still get carried away, and I try to be conscious about it, because I'm like, I don't want to think about it, like, oh man, I think I ruined that person's day just for a cheap laugh,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good introspection to have that, and then to like align your actions with it.
Yeah. So, yeah. What happened to Danny? I think he's gone.
All right, let me throw him back on. But we're hitting the hour 45 mark. This is probably our longest podcast.
Really? I was like, how long did I sign up for this thing?
We tend to just kind of go on.
Yeah. I love a good conversation. I mean, this was great. And honestly too, I like, just to share vulnerably, for me this year, my goal was to I wanted to be really intentional about not, I don't want to use the word demonizing, but like a similar word to that, but like villainizing men, because I wanted to be really intentional, because I realized that, it's so easy when you go through a separation or you break up or things like that. It's really easy to kind of like villainize the opposite sex and just go, gosh, like men are, egotistical, or they're self-centered or whatever. But this whole year I've been so intentional about wanting to really create a space where men and women can be allies and realize that we're all up against the masculine wounds and the feminine wounds that divide us culturally, because it's another system where we haven't been taught how to navigate it, because we're all choosing to we're not falling into the traditional roles anymore. And even if we do fall into the traditional roles, or if they resonate with us, we still carry things that don't serve the unique dynamic of our relationships. And so I feel like it's important, because you hear a lot of people out there, women, we are awakening. We are like wanting our wild to come out. We are feeling empowered, wanting to be goddess-like, and we want men to raise to the occasion. But in that, sometimes I see women being like, oh, it's all about the divine feminine, which I love. But it's like, where's the divine masculine? And like, how can we support him on his healing journey? And how can we support men, tune into their wounds that keep them from being more compassionate and more secure in their masculine, while we are in our wild feminine. And so I'm just so grateful that I had the opportunity to like sit with y'all.
No, that's great. And I like you say that. I just wanted to say it's unfortunate that, in our society, we aren't given that space. I mean, I can say as a Hispanic male growing up, I was always told, like, you don't cry, you stand strong for your partner, you don't show that emotion. I mean, that's just what I was taught. And as I've grown, I've kind of I believe there is some truth to it, but it's not like I'm afraid to show my emotion to my partner. No, that's one thing. But as far as being strong, I feel like the masculine energy, I need to be strong for my partner so she can look up and be like, we can be strong together then.
It's supposed to give them a sense of security, right? Like the woman's supposed to feel safe and secure because the man is being this. He can't show no vulnerability. The vulnerability should come from the woman. And I think that's where the flaws are in society. It's just things have to change. And the funny part is when we're trying to push change, people are looking, it's like, no, you guys are being soft. It's like, well, no, that's not the case. We're just trying to make the world a better place. The world has been trying to be so hard on people that look where it's at.
And it seems like, I mean, adding on, it seems like this whole masculine energy is now relabeled to masculine toxicity.
Yeah.
And which I understand. There's things that we need to
Should we go another hour?
I don't want to do that.
We could do a whole talk on like the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah. That's a whole nother conversation. But
seriously.
But it's so true.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy because I feel like lately the two polar opposites are even stronger than ever. Like the toxic masculinity and the toxic femininity. It's crazy to see this right now and living in these times.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like that's why I felt like so called to be intentional this year about like I am not going to close myself up and feel like all men are toxic and this and that, because the thing is, toxic men are men with trauma. That's all that is. Toxic women are women with trauma, and they might not be ready to heal their traumas yet. So it's like, heal in yourself, because then you don't have to participate with toxic men and women. Like if you're healed, you aren't insecure in yourself and desperate for connection that you're willing to participate with toxic patterns of behavior. It goes back to like the consistency thing, like I like people who know how to regulate their emotional experience, and sometimes they're going through a hard time, but like, I don't like people inconsistent with how they are energetically towards me. And that's part of my healing and a requirement I require for people in my life. And, again, like I'm not rigid about it. I'm always here to serve people, but yeah, I think that there's also a lot of healing happening too. And in that healing, men and women can help each other, because
I agree.
Women don't know what it's like to be a man in this culture growing up. Like we think we know, but I don't know what it's like to be conditioned to be the provider, and that my worth is going to come from being the provider. My conditioning is my value and my worth is going to come from how well I support the provider, right. And the wound that I act out on is abandoning myself in order to put the masculine's ambitions to be superior to mine. And that's just like an example, but it's like, how can we get into witnessing each other's experiences of those pressures and how we're navigating the healing? And how can I, like a man who's like, I always thought like my value is going to be what the status of my job was and how much money I made.
Right.
So his mission in life is to achieve those two things. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, how can I witness you as you navigate the wounds of that? Because I can't heal that in somebody, and I can't make a man realize that that's not his only value, but I can witness him as he explores his own healing and discovers his own redefining of what does it mean to be a strong provider to a woman. It's not just about what the West teaches us, financial value. It means I am a man that shows my emotions to her, because when I express myself to her, she feels safe, and she feels seen. Exactly. She feels connected. So it's like navigating that. It's that whole nother system of redefining.
It really is. It really is.
Awesome.
Again, we could have gone into
we should schedule another segue to just kind of go ahead and just start wrapping it up. And before we wrap it up, I wanted to just touch back on like how words have power and things like that. And it has been proven that I'm a sucker for the show called Mythbusters, and they did an episode where they had plants like the ones behind you, and they had plants that they purposely treated with care, and they talked nice to it, and they had plants that they spoke to, and they were just treating with abuse and saying negative things, and they showed that over time the plant that was talked with abuse and negative words, it didn't survive, and the other one was growing it flourished
beautifully.
Yeah, and so that's why I guess when I saw the episode a long time ago, that's when I was like, wow, words have power, and it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for everyone to just understand what they say and how they say it to others, because, it's as cliche as it sounds, we don't know what people are going through. And sometimes they look at you and maybe you could be that person to help them out of whatever they need, and they need that energy from you. And if all you're doing is spewing back that energy that they have, that they want to get rid of, they're never going to get out of it.
Deep.
Drowning.
So, yeah, with that said, I just wanted to go ahead and say thank you for coming on to the Cave podcast. You are officially the longest pod we've had, and that's nothing wrong with that. I think it was a great, very informative podcast. There was a lot of things I learned from you personally. That's why, in the beginning, I was just kind of just listening intently, because I was like, there's a lot to learn from you, and I hope that people who listen to this podcast can learn more from you. So at this point in the moment, I want to give you an opportunity to tell whoever's listening where they can find you and what they can look forward from you.
Yeah, I have more podcasts coming out. I just started a podcast with my two best friends that we're going to be doing when we're inspired to do it. I actually have a lot of podcast episodes coming up with men, because I just organically attracted men that I could really have these honest conversations with. Mm-hmm. But you can follow me on Instagram. It's at Feel the Heal with Dacey. And then I have a website. It's Feel the Heal with Dacey, which is more for like services. If you're seeking a coach or a mentor or someone, if you resonate with what I talked about and you think I could be a good support to you in your healing journey, then you can find me there.
Perfect.
Feel the Heal with Dacey. I put it up on the screen. Did I get that right? Is there a period between?
It's Feel the Heal with Dacey, but I think you'll be able to find
all right.
Yeah.
I got it right.
And it's all in the name. Like everything we talked about, it's like you got to get into the body and feel it to heal it.
Exactly.
I like that.
Feel the heal.
Feel that heal.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming by. This is definitely an episode I'm going to share with friends, and hopefully we get to sit down with you again in the future.
Talk about whatever else there's plenty left out.
We could go a lot of different ways. Clearly it's easy to talk between us.
Yeah.
We just
I like that.
So we'll be in touch. It was so great meeting you guys, and thank you again for having me.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one, guys. I'll see you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.